don't hit that skip button because I have huge news for you. The Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt lives. It is here. It is available to purchase. Oh, yes, I'm not kidding. We finally got our Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt out, and it's amazing. It is printed by the same company that prints for Cavity Colors and Fright Rags, which, if you're a hardcore horror fan who buys a lot of horror t shirts, I know I do, you know that's the very best and highest quality because we couldn't do anything less for our fans. It's an amazing full color design designed by Jason Ragosta. It's very cool. It features a zombified myself, a zombified Damon, and it looks just like an awesome horror shirt because that's what we want, because we're horror fans too. So we wanted to make a t-shirt that you could really sink your teeth into. Go to rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com. Again, that's rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com to get your t-shirt today. Rewind of the Living Dead is a review show, so spoilers are ahead.
The opening weekend success for Saw resulted in a sequel being ordered immediately, but director James Wan and collaborator Lee Wanell were already working on their next film titled Dead Silence, so they weren't available. Meanwhile, music video director Darren Lynn Bousman had just completed work on his first film called The Desperate that shared a lot of similarities to Saw. Bousman thought his dream was dead, and when Lionsgate came calling, he thought the studio wanted to shut down his film, but instead, they offered him a job. His script was repurposed along with some help from Wanell to transform it into something that fit into the larger Saw universe, and the sequel was official. The film finds a dirty cop at the mercy of the vengeful Jigsaw, with his son locked in a house with a group of ex-convicts he helped put away.
What started me in my work, and I was determined to test the fabric of human nature. I've never murdered anyone. The decisions are up to them.
He's testing us!
Who's testing us?
Jigsaw?
He's a serial killer.
You have to play by the rules!
I'm gonna get out of here.
It's not a good idea.
Those who don't appreciate life do not deserve life. Do you appreciate yours? Saw 2, rated R.
In the latest episode of Rewind of the Living Dead, we're going to play a game again as we look back at the 2005 sequel, Saw 2. Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm Patrick Guerra.
And Patrick, this week we are diving into Saw 2 because Saw X is coming out in a matter of days at this point, and Saw X actually takes place between Saw 1, which we actually reviewed on this show about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and Saw 2. So it's kind of a prequel, kind of a sequel. It's the return of Jigsaw, Tobin Bell, and Shawnee Smith both coming back to the series they helped launch back in the early 2000s. So we thought, why not dive into the film that followed Saw 1 and now technically, I guess, follows Saw X as well.
Yeah, why not get a little warm up with some Saw? Saw, one of those beloved early 2000s franchises. I remember going down memory lane talking about the original Saw and how absolutely wild of a time it was at the theaters. I still, to this day, think about like at the end of the original Saw, that twist that Jigsaw was in the room with them the whole time and everybody in the theater just erupting. Like I absolutely love moments like that just they stick in my brain as like, this is a great theater experience. This was something that like I just could not replicate anywhere else, where like an entire theater of people lose their mind at a twist. And then I remember thinking like, I gotta see Saw 2 because Saw 1 was so insane. It just was. And I remember going to the theater and this was still kind of that magic time, Damon, where like you couldn't reserve a seat. You had to wait in line outside for an hour, especially on a big premiere night for a big popular movie. This movie did very well, and it was a ride. Like I am nostalgic for the days when movies were a pure ride, and the Saw series, for better and worse, has always been that.
Yeah, Saw is an interesting one because the first one was such a kind of a like a low budget, out of nowhere, kind of left field hit because James Wan was not established, Lee Wanell was not established. Now those are two names. If you are involved in filmmaking, you definitely know James Wan, and you should know Lee Wanell because he's written a lot of great films. He's acted in films. He did The Invisible Man a couple years ago, which we reviewed.
Very good.
An excellent film. So you should know those names, but at the time in 2004, I believe, when Saw came out, they were both unknowns. Like no one had ever heard of them. They were just two guys from Australia who made a horror film. And then, like horror does, for better or worse, as you kind of said there, once it's successful, man, they just start rolling out. They want to move quick, and they literally the next year at Halloween, they're like, we got to get another Saw sequel, and now I want to say Saw X is the 10th film in the series because they just keep going, man. The train just keeps rolling. There is no stopping. And I don't, with some franchises that are not like, like I've liked Saw. I've enjoyed the Saw movies that I've seen. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I've seen them all because I haven't. But I do know that, like any franchise, when you start getting into 7, 8, 9, 10 films, the quality is going to go downhill. It's impossible for it not to. I've said on this show many times that I think Scream is the only franchise I can remember through part 6 already that all the films have been pretty serviceable. Even Scream 3, which is a film that a lot of people don't like. I actually tend to like that film. It's not my favorite in the franchise, but it's still a pretty decent movie. That's a high praise compared to a lot of horror films where you get to like the later parts where you're like, man, this is rough. Scream might be the only one. Listen, I'm the biggest Nightmare on Elm Street fan in the world, and we did the whole review of the series, and even I couldn't defend Dream Child and Freddy's Dead and the remake and everything. Like even I'm not that lunatic. And you'd say the same thing about Friday the 13th, which is your favorite series. So there's a good and a bad side. Like when Saw comes out, like you're like, oh, boom, they're gonna make sequels, and this is gonna be a huge franchise. Then you get into like 9, 10 films, and you're kind of like, is this really still worthwhile? Are we still like at the same point here? Like, does it get old? Does it get drawn out? I will say, and I know we're gonna review Saw X on a later episode when it comes out, but I will say they've gone back to the well, and they learned that the characters that people like and dig and care about are obviously Jigsaw, played by Tobin Bell, and Shawnee Smith, who plays Amanda, his former victim turned acolyte, his apprentice.
Yeah.
At one point in the film series, I don't know if you even know this, Patrick, because I know you're not like the massive Saw fan, they killed both characters off. At one point,
I didn't know that. Thanks for the spoiler, Damon.
Yeah, sorry, it's like 15 years past the point. Saw 3, they actually killed both characters. So it's weird like how they continue on the series for like 5 more films past that. But I think they realize that what people like about the Saw films are Jigsaw and Amanda. So they're like, all right, let's go back to that well, because you and I reviewed Spiral, the one with Chris Rock, and that film was not great.
Yeah.
It was all right. It was very, very forgettable. When it was over, I was like, yeah, I saw it. I don't need to see it again. And I think they realized, even with Chris Rock, like actually putting some star power back into the film, and that actually had quite a bit of buzz, if you remember.
I do. I was a buzz.
It just did not work, and they're kind of like, well, where do we go from here? Let's bring back Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith. But at this point with Saw 2, this was just a continuation of the first one in a lot of ways, just kind of rolling into the second film. And they didn't overcomplicate it, which I appreciate. They kept it fairly simple. There is we're in spoiler territory. The film is, at this point, we're 18 years past it coming out. We're not hiding anything here. The twist at the end is, I always remember the twist at the end of this movie, because I was like, even when I saw it the first time, and I can't remember if I saw it in the theater or not, but I do remember seeing this the first time, and I saw the twist at the end. I was like, oh, that's great. Like it was a solid follow up to one of the best twists in film history, in my opinion. Like, just talking about the closing into Saw with the whole, actually Jigsaw's there and been alive the entire time. This, I would say, rivaled it. Certainly not better. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying like equal. It's like we always talk about. Like we've talked on and off the air about our love, and we did a review for his last film with M. Night Shyamalan. When M. Night Shyamalan did the big twist in The Sixth Sense, which is still talked about to this day as one of the greatest twists in movie history, that set the bar so high, and it's almost like every film he had come after that, he had to try to top it. Now, Unbreakable, which is my favorite M. Night Shyamalan film, which I actually like better than The Sixth Sense, I think had an even better twist, but that's my opinion. I'd assume most moviegoers would probably disagree with me. My point being is when you set the bar that high, you have to start trying to top yourself. At least with Saw 2, I will say that while they didn't top Saw 1, because I think that's kind of an impossible metric, they rivaled it. It was a solid, really good, didn't see it coming twist. And that to me was like, okay, you just made a good film. Now, again, we're not getting into Saw 3, 4, 5, whatever the hell else there is out there. But at least with Saw 2, they made a comparable sequel, in my opinion.
They did. And I definitely remember going to see it in the theater. I remember another packed house, another wild Friday night. And it was really what I was anticipating more than anything. I wasn't looking for a twist at the time. I wasn't looking for like a way to like surprise me with the ending. What got me back then was I wanted to see more of the game. That was the big appeal to me with Jigsaw in the first movie. It's like, this guy plays games with people. It was very like Seven, and I don't remember the timeline. Like Seven's definitely before Saw, right? Yeah. It's like the 90s. Yeah.
It was like 95, I think, 96.
Yeah, like something like that. So it had this like Seven vibe to it that was much more like kind of edgy, like a post-Matrix edgy, like weird Seven. And so to me, I was like, I really want to see what more games can Jigsaw play for us. And of course, you have the iconic puppet. The puppet has a name, right?
Billy?
Is the puppet? Is it Billy? I don't know. Well, I'm bad at the Saw franchise.
Billy is the name of the puppet in Dead Silence, which is also a James Wan film, so maybe I'm getting those mixed up. But I feel like the puppet had a name, but maybe I'm making that up. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like this puppet looked great. Now, if I remember correctly, James Wan actually designed the puppet. The puppet looked great. The character of Jigsaw really had this cool bend to it, and that bend continues here. And you kind of hit the ground running in this movie with a pretty intense game just to start off with the death mask, and I loved that, and especially watching it this time around, I love that they just went so hard right away because Damon, we know what the opening of this movie is. This guy's got basically a bear trap on his head, on his neck, that is set to close, and if he can't unlock it, he's going to die. And then the twist, I was like, all right, how's this going to go? How's this going to go? And then the twist is the key is in his eyeball. And is he willing to cut his own eye out to get the key to save his own life? Like, Jigsaw puts you in a situation to see if you will fight for your own life. Like, that's a very intriguing thing. And I don't even think I fully appreciated it at the time, but it drew me in a way that I don't think a lot of slashers, if you want to call this a slasher, do. It's just like it puts everything in the victim's hands. Like this entity in the background determines things, but you have to go through the horror yourself. You have to inflict the horror on yourself. That's visceral, man. That just like pulls you in a whole new direction. And the great thing about Wan and Company, and of course this movie is more Darren Lynn Bozeman's movie than anything else, but like the idea that's just like, you're in this trap, you want to get out, cut your eyeball out, or dig right in there and get that key. It hits the ground running. It kicks you straight in the nuts. It's a hell of a cold open. It's a great cold open. I don't know if I would call it like one of the most memorable. Like, I don't know if I just quizzed a random horror person and said, tell me your top 5 cold opens. I don't know if Saw 2 does that, but watching it back for this podcast, I was like, dude, that fucking went right for it. I respect that they just wanted to come out of the gate running.
Yeah, that was a really good one. By the way, it is Billy, the name of the puppet.
It is Billy. Okay,
right.
good.
Yeah, I was right about that. Yes, Billy the puppet. It is a really strong opening, and they set the tone right away. And what I actually loved about that opening scene was after the detective played by Lesser Wahlberg.
Is that his name?
No.
I always thought it was something.
Yeah,
I always thought it was the other thing.
I just call him Lesser Wahlberg, the not
Lesser
Wahlberg.
Lesser
Wahlberg, Donnie
Lesser
Wahlberg, his name, but I call him Lesser Wahlberg. Lesser Wahlberg discovers where Jigsaw's hideout is, and he breaks in, and he talks about you're a killer, and Jigsaw has a great line where he says, "I've never killed anyone. I just give them a choice." I was like real sadistic. I love that line where it says it's like I've never killed anyone. I just give them the choice. And it's a really, really creepy line that works well, especially when you think back to that opening scene with the guy with the as you said, kind of like a bear trap with nails on it, and he's got to dig through his own eyeball to get out a key to unlock it to get himself free. Super sadistic, super creepy, and of course we all know that has become a staple of the Saw franchise are the traps. That's what Jigsaw is known for. And what I appreciate, a couple of things I appreciate about that, and I've appreciated about the Saw films in general. One, it's not supernatural, so there's none of that tied in. It's all human, real human. And then two, it still presents you with a really intriguing, terrifying, yet gruesome premise, right? Like, it's not just a guy chasing you around with a butcher knife. It's not a guy chasing you around with a hatchet or an axe or what we would typically think of as slasher. But the creative way that they do the traps and how they kind of position it back to the person who's involved in the trap is super gruesome, super creepy, and it works really well for these films. Now, as we said, there's always too much of a good thing, and you can always go too far. I know that's been like one of the complaints from Saw fans later in the films is they got a little too ridiculous. But by Saw 1, which is an incredible premise, into Saw 2, which, by the way, in my opinion, all the traps, all of the setups work really well in this film because we're not carbon copying it to the nth degree. We're not to the like part 9. In part 2, they still had a lot of fresh ideas, and all of these work really well, particularly as you mentioned that cold open where you don't know anything about this character, but you have this premise where you're like, and they show him the x-ray where you see the key in his eye, and you're just like, oh, and it's, what I do love about the Saw films and this one in particular is that it gets you right away. Like, it's like those scenes you see in movies. Like, if you have a thing about nails on a chalkboard or fingernails in general, like we talked about this with Boy Behind the Door, other movies that have that, there's just a visceral feeling when you see a fingernail getting peeled back or broken off or things. So there's just like thinking about digging into your own eye to find a key, and he grabs that scalpel, and you're like, oh no, he's about to dig into his own eye to get this key out. It's so nasty and just so you feel it. You feel it. It's like you said, a kick in the nuts. Sorry to the female audience out there, but like it's like when a guy, like when you watch a fight, like I cover UFC for a living, when you watch a dude take a groin shot in a fight, every man around the world winces. You just feel it, right? Like you feel it. Like you feel for that. You feel that moment. When you see someone get kicked in the balls, you feel it. Same kind of thing here. When you see a dude about to dig into his head with a scalpel into his eye, you're like, no, you're closing your eye like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
You know what I love? The little detail about that is that when he wakes up, his eye is clearly swollen and infected.
Yeah.
Like, it's just this little insult to injury. Like, there's no like, it's such a great attention to detail, but it looks like someone went in there and shoved a key back behind his eye, and his eye is reacting very poorly to having a key in it. It's swollen, it's red and yellowish and purplish. And it's so like, not only do you have to dig into the eye already looks infected. It looks like it's hurting already. And now you're going to have to poke into that nasty skin that's inflamed and all fucked up. It's just, that's the kind of devious shit that you get up for in the morning as a horror person, or in my case in the afternoon. Like, it's just the way, it's just like what you want out of this shit. And so I don't know, I respect that. And I think this movie across the board tries to keep doing that. I mean, it's not perfect at every turn, but it's like, how do we up the ante? But then how do we create a brand new premise around, like Jigsaw, which is like, okay, we saw what he did the first time. And the first time he was trying to see if people would fight for the life, but he was getting the revenge on the doctor, right? Who I think, it sucks that I'm having to try and remember this off the top of my head. The doctor, Cary Elwes, he was his cancer doctor, right?
Yeah, I believe it was. I want to say it was like really bad. I want to say it was really poor bedside manner and just like, like there was no compassion or whatever. I can't remember. He was his doctor. He was his oncologist. Yes.
Right. And so you're like, okay, he did in the first movie, it was about that. It was about like getting revenge on this oncologist. And in this movie, it's a different thing. And it's like, I don't know, Damon, dare I say that it's trying to put Jigsaw in more of like a Dexter light, where it's like, I'm going after somebody who's bad.
I'm punishing you. I'm punishing.
Yeah. I'm punishing you for your sins. It's kind of a different take. It's a little bit of a different take than the first movie. This is like let me take my deviousness and use it for good. Because what he wants to do is torture a bad cop.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like when you move, because again, not getting into too deep into like what we're going to be talking about with Saw X. Have you seen the trailer for Saw X? Like, I think we all okay. That film is taking it back to a more personal level with John and John Kramer's Jigsaw and his cancer diagnosis, and that kind of is like where it's again much like what happens with Cary Elwes' character in the original Saw. It's a much more personal kind of revenge story for him. In Saw 2, this is more about, like you said, like that Dexter, like this is punishing a bad actor, punishing a bad cop. And it doesn't really have as much to do with John personally, as Jigsaw personally, but that's also what becomes the series. And I think that's a good shift because you can't just make it all about revenge over and over and over again. Even that one about revenge was also like giving him a choice to survive. You know what I mean? Like he didn't just straight up kill him. He was cheating on his wife and all the other things we learned in that movie and, how the connection was with Lee Wanell's character and all that kind of stuff. But so it was revenge, so it was more personal. This one isn't really personal at all. I mean, it's not. Like the only personal aspect to Jigsaw in this movie is that he puts his apprentice in the house as like a weapon to use against these people and eventually against Lesser Wahlberg when he shows up to the house with Shawnee Smith's character, Amanda. So like this isn't personal. This is just a teaching lesson. Like you are a bad cop. You've done bad things as a cop. You've planted evidence. You put people in jail who didn't belong there. Now I'm going to turn the tables on you and something bad's going to happen to you. And also, like, they use his son as a tool to punish the cop. But again, there is almost like a morality to Jigsaw because he doesn't want to punish the kid. The kid's the one who is safe the whole time, basically. Like the kid gets pulled out and he's given a antidote and he's put under the oxygen mask and shoved in the safe because Jigsaw wasn't after him. He was after the dad. He just used him as a tool to get to the dad. So it's like a morality tale in a lot of ways. And I know we always talk about story and I hammer on story. It's my thing. But that's what I appreciate about this sequel is it does take you, it keeps the same spirit of the original film, but it doesn't just bludgeon you over the head like, okay, he went after his oncologist, now he's going to go after his general practitioner in the sequel. Like, that would just be like, okay, how many doctors and nurses? Like, what else are we going to go down this road for? Like, his cab
tobacco executives.
Yeah, his cab driver wouldn't drop him off for the hospital. Like, what are we going to, how deep down the personal hole are we going to go here? I appreciate that it became a morality tale, like, and you don't really learn that until very late in the film. Like, you don't know the connection. Like, you understand pretty early on when we meet the characters in the house that they're all convicts, they're all ex-cons, they've all served time, they've all been to prison in some form or fashion. Then later on, you realize that they were all put away by Lesser Wahlberg. And that's when it starts tying together and the whole.
By the way, it's Detective Eric Matthews.
Yes,
Lesser Wahlberg.
It's Lesser Wahlberg. That's when Lesser Wahlberg figures it out, and that's when you really start to see the gears start churning, as far as like why his son is there and how this whole thing's been orchestrated, and also how it becomes much more personal for Lesser Wahlberg when he knows his son's trapped in there with a bunch of people he erroneously put in prison. It's a really good, it's a really tight, really well done story. And I really dug that about this because they could have gone in a lot of different directions for a sequel. Again, they could have carried it out. And I know they're actually kind of going back to that bite of the apple for the new sequel by saying it's another cancer story. But this is 10 years later. This is 18 years later. It's okay to kind of revisit that. It feels like this would have been the direct sequel of what they're doing with Saw X or Saw 10 or whatever they're calling it. It would have felt a little tired, right? Like, oh, we're doing the same thing over again with the revenge. Now, 18 years later, we can go back and revisit it, and it doesn't feel rehashed or the same story over again. 1 year later, which is when this film came out, it would have felt that way. And so the fact that they just turned it into what you said, Dexter, punishment. This is a bad guy, and we're going to punish a bad guy. Now, you're using a lot of ex-cons as weapons, and they all end up dying, minus like one person. But
Oh yeah, he's still evil.
You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, Patrick.
No, Jigsaw must break eggs. That's his thing. Oh, yes, he's never killed anyone. He's right. But boy, oh boy, does he love to see people die. He is, like, at the end of the day, whether you're rooting for him to teach a bad cop a lesson or not, he's still a complete raging psychopath. And what another thing that I actually really appreciate about Saw 2 is that the perspective changes a little bit. Whereas in the first movie, you have the Danny Glover detective character who's kind of trying to figure things out, and then you have Carrie Ellius and Lee Winnell, their characters trying to find their way out of it. But they're in this one room, and that's kind of they're just doing clues themselves in this one room. Now we expand it to a house, and now we expand it to a team of people who are locked up. And you're like, oh, okay, well, this is definitely a different way to approach this. And their ticking clock is that poison gas that you mentioned. They're all sick with it. They're all getting weaker. They are all close to death, and they have to desperately find the clues. It's the world's worst escape room is what is going on right now. And the dynamic, it sort of like creates a little bit of a like zombie apocalypse dynamic where you've got different people in the room who are all from different backgrounds, who clash in the face of adversity, in the face of horror. They all clash, and there's their own little character arcs. They have their own villain, and then their own twist because there's another villain in the room with them, and they don't even know it. I really dug that, and the twist for this movie was that you learn the Amanda character, who in the very first movie had the reverse bear trap on her mouth. She decided to become Jigsaw's disciple, and she was in that room with them. That was my favorite part. That was my favorite part of the twist when I went to go see it in the theater, was that Amanda was now working with Jigsaw. I did not see that coming at the time. I was like, holy shit, that's fucking cool. At the time, I just thought, wow, it sucks for Amanda that she's got to go through this again. No, it turns out she's co-architect of this entire devious plan. And when you find out in the end, yes, indeed, Amanda was helping pull the strings the whole time, because her job was basically to make sure that Danny Matthews, the son of Detective Matthews, got out of there alive. Sending Detective Matthews on this goose chase that he was never meant to catch up with. Like, all it was just a matter of, like, actually help me out with this, Damon. The whole point, I guess, was to just keep Detective Matthews with Jigsaw until what?
Okay. So I want to talk about this, getting into what you said, because there were three major twists in this movie, okay? The first big one is when you discover that everything that's happened in the house happened days earlier. This was not live. The cops think they're watching a live video of these people being tortured and killed and all these things happening in the house. It's all been pre-recorded. This has happened days ago. And you get your first clue of that before they actually discover it. You get your first clue of that when Lesser Wahlberg shows up to the house and he goes in and he's shining his light down. You can see when he shines the light down on one of the dead people, the hand is already kind of decomposing a little bit. I didn't notice that before. I noticed it on this rewatch. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, if you're paying super close attention, you can see when he kills one of the victims is dead. It's already laying on the ground. He shines it down on the hand, and you can see the hand is already kind of decomposing, which would not be the case if this just happened within the last couple hours. Because remember, we're talking 2 hours is what he tells it. When he first shows up, he says, you got 2 hours. So basically, this was all. So, first off, this was all pre recorded. That was the first twist we learned. This all happened days earlier. He's just setting this up as a way to mentally torture the cop. Now, to your point, when Lesser Wahlberg sits down to talk to Jigsaw, Jigsaw says to him, I just want you to sit down and hear me out and let me talk to you. And if you do that, you'll find your son safe and sound.
Yeah.
He couldn't do it. The cop could not allow himself to sit there and talk and because all it was trying to get to, what Jigsaw, the entire purpose, like he was basically, what Jigsaw's entire purpose is to make people realize to appreciate life, right? Like that's his whole thing. He had his taken away by cancer. He wants you to appreciate, like people who don't appreciate their lives, he wants them to appreciate their lives, or at least try to do that, because people are on drugs or doing whatever they're doing. They're just throwing their life away, and he would give anything to have one more day because he's dying of cancer. It's eating away at him, and he's going to die soon. So I think that 2-hour conversation while the tape is playing is just his like mental torture of going after the cop, because it keeps escalating. He keeps talking to him, kind of talking in circles, talking about his cancer, talking about how he lost life, blah, blah, blah. And he eventually gets to the point where they find the files that he had gathered on all the people in the house. And these were all people that Lesser Wahlberg had put away erroneously. They were people he set up, planted evidence, whatever, and they got put away on his work as a cop, and they all went to jail for it. Even if they were guilty in some way, shape, or form, they didn't do what he said they did at that time. And so he put all these people into prison. So I think that whole thing was just a mental exercise of like testing him. And he said, when you sit down, if you sit with me right now and talk to me, in 2 hours, your son will be safe and sound. He couldn't do it. And that's when the clock finally ticks down and the whole thing ends, the safe opened. All he had to do was sit there for the 2 hours and talk to John. Couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole point. He wanted to prove him right. He's like, this guy deserves to be punished, and he can't even, because when he reveals to him that he's a bad cop and he's done all this stuff, he can't even reconcile that. Like he doesn't want to admit it. He doesn't want to, he doesn't want to confess to what he's done. You know what I mean? He's not even willing to do that to save his own son. He's willing to go the hard route, which is beating up Jigsaw, dragging him out. Exactly what Jigsaw knew would happen, because this guy is a dirty cop. Lesser Wahlberg couldn't handle it, and he dragged him out there. And all he had to do was do exactly what John sat there and said at the beginning. Sit here and talk to me for 2 hours, and your son will be safe and sound. And he couldn't do it.
Yeah. The timer runs out, and the safe pops open, and there's his son safe. But it doesn't matter, because Detective Matthews could not sit there and just be a human. He had to fucking beat the shit out of Jigsaw, and finally Jigsaw relents and goes, okay, I'll tell you where it's at, because what he wants, basically what he's saying is, if you're going to play this game this way, my game was to see if you could last and be a human. You can't. So if you're taking door number two leads you into that same hellhole that I locked all those other people in, and you get to stay there for good. Like it's a much more esoteric way of playing the game, of Jigsaw's game. Like, it's harder to draw that game. You can draw all of his other games pretty much. Yeah. That's a hard one to draw because it's very conceptual. But it was like it was a test of humanity, and Detective Matthews fails it.
So we had, as I said, we had three big twists. The first one, of course, was the fact that this is pre-recorded. It happened days ago, which I thought was a brilliant twist. I loved that. When you figure out it's all tape recorded and they're playing it back, I was like, oh, that was great. Like, what a great way to just fuck with him. Two, of course, was the fact that Danny was locked in the safe with an oxygen mask on. He was never in danger. I mean, he was in danger in the house, but like he was never. Once that got solved, once the house problem got solved, and everyone else was dead, and Amanda, obviously at some point Amanda turned on Danny or knocked him out or whatever she did to save him, gave him the antidote, and then they took him back to Jigsaw, shoved him in the safe, put the oxygen mask over his face, and basically gave him enough air to survive while they fucked with his dad. That is such a brilliant twist. I love that. There's no risk at that point. Like that you said the Amanda thing was your favorite. That was my favorite, the pre-recorded thing. And then leading into his son was there the entire time. All he had to do was do exactly what Jigsaw said. You sit here and talk to me for 2 hours, you'll find your son safe and sound. Couldn't do it. And then as soon as the timer ran out, boom, safe open. All he had to do was sit there and not be a piece of shit, and he would have got his son back. And so those are the two. And then, of course, the third big one is Amanda is actually an apprentice, an acolyte, a disciple of Jigsaw. And she has her speech because Detective Matthews, Lesser Wahlberg, locked her up. And so it was her test to prove herself to Jigsaw. This was all her idea. This was all her plan because she wanted to get him back for putting her in jail when she didn't deserve it. And so that's why her voice is on the tape recorder at the end when Lesser Wahlberg shows up in there and he's trapped in there and you hear her voice. She's like, I found a father, I found someone who loved me and blah, blah, blah. And this was my test. My test was you, Lesser Wahlberg. And then he's trapped in there forever and he will die a horrendous death, basically starving to death and laying in the ground of a darkened room with his leg chained to a wall. Bye-bye, Lesser Wahlberg. So those three twists all end at the end of the movie, and I loved it because I didn't see any of them really coming, to be honest. Like I didn't, you know what I mean? Like looking back at it, I remembered each one as they happened, but I didn't really see any of them coming at the time. Like I definitely didn't see the pre-recorded thing. They did such a good job of hiding that the whole entire time, and the only way you would have picked it up is when Lesser Wahlberg goes in the house and shines the light and you see the decomposed hand. That's what I caught this time. I was like, oh shit. If you really paid attention, you would have at least clicked in your head and say, why is that hand decomposed? It just happened like 10 minutes ago or an hour ago. That was my first clue. The first time I ever noticed that, and I've seen this film at least 3 times, maybe 4. That's a good one. Danny being locked in the safe. I certainly didn't see that coming. That one threw me because once you see the recording, you're kind of like, what the fuck? And then again, that. And then Amanda, because I was with you. I was like, oh man, this poor girl. Like she was in the first film, she got tortured and released, and now she's back in the shit. Man, Jigsaw really has it out for her. And yeah, all 3 got me and all 3 work. And I love, like I said, even when twists come and I see them coming, I can still enjoy them. Didn't see any of these coming.
No, I didn't see shit coming. Now I got a question for you, Damon. I ducked out of the Saw series after this. Are the rest of them Amanda as the Jigsaw killer?
No. So part 3, I've only seen through part 3. Part 3, if I remember correctly, both John and Amanda are there, and John dies, and then Amanda dies too at the end of the third one, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And so I think that was supposed to be the end. But then it somehow continues to carry on. And I know there's like a convoluted, weird way, and I think that's why the film started falling apart, because it's like, okay, it's not Jigsaw and it's not Amanda. What the hell's going on? And I can't remember how it carried on in Saw 4 because I've seen bits and pieces of some of the other films, and I know there's still like the Billy the Puppet, and there's a voice that sounds like Jigsaw, but it's not Jigsaw, so I don't know the whole story. I'm sure there's some Saw historian who's losing his mind, losing her mind right now, listening to this, saying these guys are really fucking this up. But yeah, I know they die in Saw 3, but it keeps going, and I can't remember how.
Wow, I can't believe you'd kill her off in Saw 3. I mean, what do I know? I mean, but it's just like, I like Shawnee Smith as an actor. I think she's great. And it was like, to me, it would have been a no-brainer to just make her the Jigsaw for the rest of the series. But I don't know, whatever. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're more sophisticated these days. At that time, they were just like, oh, it's got to be somebody different. Like it has to be a copycat killer or whatever. And I don't know. I think it would have been cool to like let her take over the series because they painted themselves in the corner in the first one anyway with Tobin Bell dying of cancer. his character dying of cancer. It's like, well, he's not going to last long. We can only go so long with Jigsaw. He will have to die. But it, it's kind of, it's interesting. Like, I don't dislike that twist to it all, but he's iconic, man. I fucking love Tobin Bell. Like, and I was really in this movie very enamored by him. It's because I think there was way more time with him. Obviously, in the first one, most of the time he's face down in a puddle of his own fake blood. So in this one, when you're sitting across the table from him, and you see that he's absolutely maniacal, but he's mentally superior to Detective Matthews. Like, just on every level, he has more philosophical knowledge. He has more humanity, more knowledge of humanity. He can see things on a bigger scale, and he can, and then he's this criminal mastermind on top of that. He can create these elaborate torture devices and shit like that. So I was definitely way more taken with him in this movie. That's something that I like over the original. Is the original, he's sort of just in the ether somewhere. Here you get to face him and see just how much of an evil genius he is.
And I know that Tobin Bell has kind of gotten pigeonholed into this role because this is what he's best known for. It's kind of like, if you're Robert Englund, you're known for Freddy Krueger, and it's hard for him to escape that. Now, I've seen a lot of things that Robert Englund has done outside of Nightmare on Elm Street, and I enjoy him very much as an actor. There's actually a great documentary out there right now called Nightmares and Dreamscapes. It's on Screenbox about Robert Englund's career. And, of course, it covers a lot of the Nightmare stuff, but he had a career outside of that. But Tobin Bell's kind of the same thing. Do you know where I first saw Tobin Bell? This is a funny story. Do you remember was Saw the first time you ever saw Tobin Bell?
That I know of.
So the first time I remember seeing Tobin Bell, he was in one episode of The Sopranos. He plays.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, they're thinking about taking AJ, their son, to a military academy, and he plays the commander of that academy, and he interviews with Tony Soprano and his wife. And then he interviews with AJ Soprano, and that's Tobin Bell. First time I'd ever seen him, and I remember watching that. And then I saw Saw, and I was like, "Is that the same guy?" Yeah, but he's been in other things, but of course, this is the role he's best known for. Now, Shawnee Smith, I remember her from a little movie from the '80s called Summer School. Do you remember Summer School with Mark Harmon?
Summer School for sure. I used to watch it all the time because there was the two guys in there obsessed with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just like me.
Yes, exactly. Well, Shawnee Smith is in that movie playing a pregnant girl. That's Shawnee Smith. That's where I saw her. And then I think I may have told this story during the Saw 1 review a couple years ago, but I'll tell it now for anyone who didn't hear that or doesn't remember that. I always remember the Saw franchise beyond the first two movies, which I really enjoyed. Years later, I want to say it was like Saw 7. They did a reality show on VH1 called Scream Queens. This is like this series that no one remembers. And one of the judges and people who were helping the contestants was James Gunn. It's the first time I'd ever heard of James Gunn, and I was like, "Oh, James Gunn, okay." And I had no idea who he was, and they were like, he was a director. I think it was right when Slither came out, if I'm not mistaken. And they were basically running all these actresses through tests and acting and blah blah blah. And the winner of the competition got a guest role, an acting spot in Saw 7, I think it was. So I always remember that series for that because whatever series that was, the winner got plugged into Scream or into Saw 7 or whatever it was. But I always remember that because James Gunn was one of the main people on the show. And I was like, oh, and that was literally the first time I'd ever seen James Gunn was on a reality show judging for Scream Queens.
Sorry, I don't know why I was muted. I don't know. Maybe I hit my button by accident.
I was going to say, why did you go quiet?
Yeah, no, I was trying to say, my fondest memory of Shawnee Smith is from Who's Harry Crumb. She plays Nikki Downing, because I love John Candy. I may have even mentioned that in the first Saw movie, because I was just like, "Fuck yes, dude! It's fucking Nikki Downing." I just know that movie back and forth, and she's great in it. And she plays kind of his sassy little sidekick that helps him figure everything out. And I'm a fucking huge John Candy fan, so for me, it was a double treat to see her in these movies.
Yeah, great stuff. So, all right, with that being said, Patrick, speaking of which, let's get into categories because we do have quite a bit of categories, including one really fun, also kind of twisted one that we are actually going to get involved here in a little bit. But let's kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show and talk about best performance. So, Patrick, what was your best performance in Saw 2?
Well, I just happened to be talking about Shawnee Smith because she is my best performance in Saw 2. And then for a very specific reason, is that this time around, I knew all the twists. I knew everything that was coming. And to me, again, the biggest twist back in the day when I saw it in the movie theater was that Amanda was the killer. So seeing her act as if she's a victim in this movie, knowing full well she's not the victim at all, she was selling it so well. At some point, like it just kind of faded from my memory that, oh yeah, of course she's like Jigsaw's apprentice here. Like I just saw her as one of the victims trying to get through the gauntlet. And I was like, if that isn't the best performance, because I absolutely know what she's up to. I absolutely know everything that's going on. It should fall flat. It should feel dead for me. But her ability to convince me, even though I know full well what's going to happen, that she's in just as much peril as everybody else, it had to go to Shawnee Smith this time.
Yeah, Shawnee Smith is really good in this movie, and I agree with you. Like, I've seen this movie, as I said, 3 or 4 times. I hadn't seen it in a few years, but I've seen it 3 or 4 times. And I was in the same boat. Like, I knew the twist. I knew she became the killer. And I was like, man, she really does sell it really well. Like, she doesn't ever give you hints, and they don't try to bludgeon you over the head so you figure it out before it happens. She's really strong in that role, and she does kind of become a bit of a leader for the survivors, and you think she's leading them to safety when in reality she's leading them into doom. But she does it so well; it's really good. And she's another one. And again, I'm not judging her career by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not saying that like maybe this isn't just the career she wanted. But there's always times when I watch these horror films and I see really strong performances, and I'm like, man, she like people should have given her a better shot doing other things. Now, again, I have no idea. Maybe
Yeah.
she didn't want to do anything else. Like maybe this was what all she wanted. I'm totally fine with that. But I kind of go back to the Tobin Bell, Robert England thing, where it's like you kind of get pigeonholed into a role, and that's all you're known for. I think Shawnee Smith could easily be a great dramatic actress because she's really good in everything she's in with this franchise. And I'm like, man, like she's just so strong.
Let's see how she does in Saw X. It's been a while. I haven't seen her. I haven't seen her in a while. I don't know what she's been up to. I've been following her career, but she gets another shot in Saw X.
Yeah. So for my best performance, originally I was going to give it to Shawnee Smith, but you took that one. And I know sometimes we'll double up and I'll just kind of praise the same person. And I almost went that route with this one because she is really good. But I'm going to go the other side of this. And no, I'm not picking Lesser Wahlberg. I am
You
picking
kidding?
Tobin Bell. I think Tobin Bell's performance in this one in particular, because as you said, in the last one, he was really just a disembodied voice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's a voice on a tape recorder, and then we find out at the end it's actually a dude. Like we don't know, we don't know anything about him, and we see little flashbacks and things. But again, there's not really a lot required for that. This film, he does a lot of heavy lifting, and he actually has to like he's what I think I love most about Tobin Bell's performance in this movie is ultimately he's in control the entire time, right? Like he really is. He's in control this entire time. But he does such a good job playing feeble and broken because of the cancer and he's dying that he's like, like there's a great moment. One of the scenes that really stood out for me in this film where I was like, this is a devious motherfucker is when he's sitting there drinking and he goes up to Lesser Wahlberg and he says, "Can you get me a drink of water? I'm parched. I can't get up." And Lesser Wahlberg looks at him like he wants to spit in his face.
Yeah.
He knows the well-being of his son depends on this guy. So he has to take the cup from him and go get him water. That to me was like the ultimate fuck you in this film. Like that was Tobin Bell. That was Jigsaw being like, I've got your son. He's trapped. You're not going to do what I tell you to do, and you're going to do exactly what I say right now. You're going to go get me a drink of water, bitch. And he's like, all right, and Lester Wahlberg does it. There was something so devious in that moment that I appreciated. It was such a little thing, and he had to sell it. He had to sell it. Like, I'm too weak to get up out of this chair. And I think that also works into like the overarching story here is that here's this feeble, weak, dying man who holds all the power. There's something about that dichotomy that I appreciate, and Tobin Bell plays it so well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you heard what I said earlier. I was enthralled by his character this time around. You really got a taste for the maniacal genius that was Jigsaw.
Yeah. Let's get into this was, like you said, an escape room from hell. Let's talk about the worst escape room partner, because everybody has their faults in this group that we learn are all ex-cons that are in this house together. So Patrick, who is the worst escape room partner in Saw 2?
I've got to give it to my man Xavier. Now, Xavier plays more than just the role of a villain. He plays the important role of the ultimate misdirection in this movie. Because this group of people, this group of wrongly accused people trapped in Jigsaw's house, they all want to get out. The difference is Xavier will use all of them to get himself out. And so it takes the heat off Amanda. It's a really smart way to misdirect the audience, because you're too worried about this crazy motherfucker Xavier, who is willing to literally kill, and he does kill others to get his way out. He'll do anything to do it. And I was like, well, yeah, shit, I really don't want him on my team, because he will happily throw a nail bat into the back of my head just to get the fuck out of here. And he did it. So, maybe it's the most obvious pick, but I also realized too that he played a very important part in making all of us believe he was the biggest thing to worry about in the house beside the traps. And no, in fact, it was Amanda, but you never would have known that, because Xavier was the overarching villain while the game was being played.
Oh yeah, he was an asshole. Like, he was the worst. Like, he was just like, if Jigsaw didn't get you, Xavier was. Like, it was like there was one dude, and that dude was terrible, and he was doing everything he could to get out of there, no matter what it cost. And yeah, he was awful, and definitely not the guy you want on your side. For me, Xavier's the easy answer. I'll give you that. Like, he is the worst guy there, without a doubt. So you're 100% right about that. But I almost went with Amanda, because she's kind of responsible for everyone being there. Like, in a way, like, she
probably built most of those traps.
Yeah, but she didn't directly do anything really to anybody. Like, she even warned the guy at the start, Gus, when he's like, when it says don't turn the case, she says, I wouldn't do that. And the guy still looks at the people and gets his head blown off. Like, she told him, she warned him. Like, she tried to warn him in that moment. So in a weird way, she actually tried to save somebody, and obviously they didn't listen. So my pick, and I went kind of the funnier route, but basically I'm being honest about this. My pick is Laura as the worst escape room partner. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, which one's Laura? Laura's the blonde girl who's just dying the entire time. She does nothing. She provides no support. All she has to do is get dragged around from room to room because she's dying. I'm like, all right, like, you served no purpose here, lady. Like, you did nothing. You didn't help us solve anything. You didn't help us figure out anything. You just get dragged from room to room. You're bleeding out of your nose. Get out of here. So I say Laura because she served no purpose.
I like that pick, dude. Literally dead weight in the movie. I'm gonna throw in an honorable mention here real quick. You know who else would be a fucking real shitty escape room partner? Detective Matthews. Fucking hot-headed crooked cop, willing to fucking fuck people over to get a conviction. That's another bad one right there.
Yeah, Lesser Wahlberg would be pissed.
Lesser Wahlberg. Is it that would imply there's a greater Wahlberg, which I don't know if there is.
At least Mark Wahlberg's like been in some good. He did Boogie Nights, like that by extension alone makes him far better.
Hey, Lesser Wahlberg was in fucking Sixth Sense.
He was, but he had a very minor role.
It's a small role, but he was in a really good movie.
And Mark Wahlberg making jokes here, was a very big role in Boogie Nights. So,
Very big role in Boogie Nights, and another M Night Shyamalan movie, the chain. What was it? The
the
Happening.
happening, how he wasn't happening. But I actually like. Here's the thing. I actually like some Mark Wahlberg movies. I do. I actually really like. There's quite a few Mark Wahlberg movies I
I
like.
love The Fighter. I think The Fighter's fantastic.
He's great in that. He's great, and he's actually, like I said, I mean, he's great in that. I'm trying to. Oh, Departed. How can I forget The Departed?
Yeah, The Fighter, Departed, those are great. I love Boogie Nights. I do. All those movies are great. He's not a bad actor. I'm just saying.
He's 100% the greater Wahlberg. That's what I'm saying. Like when you can come up with a line that I quote I quote this movie. I quote at least once a month the line from The Departed where Mark Wahlberg is bitching at the guy who didn't put the security cameras in. He's like, "Who the fuck put the security cameras in here?" And he goes, "Oh, who the fuck are you?" And Wahlberg goes, "I'm the guy that does his job. You must be the other guy." I quote that at least once a month. No, Wahlberg. Yeah, that's why Donnie is the lesser Wahlberg. So I'm sorry, lesser Wahlberg.
Fair enough.
You're getting.
He does.
You're living your role, lesser Wahlberg.
Yeah, he doesn't get the juiciest roles.
Yes. Yeah. So I would agree there. All right. What about best gore? There's a fair amount of gore in this movie, and it's Saw, so of course there's gore in this movie.
I would say there's a little less gore than Saw, the original Saw, and definitely less gore than Spiral. I think Spiral was like super gory when I think about the Saw movies that I've actually seen. But I am going to go with Peephole in Your Head. So the guy you mentioned earlier, who is not listening to Amanda, looks through the peephole and gets a shot, a revolver shot right through his eye and blows the back of his head out. They use some real good detail to show off the gore that's going on in the back of his head. Call me crazy. Is gore getting worse? Like faker looking, even practical gore these days doesn't like all the gore in that movie looks so real to me.
Yeah, it's like there's a weird transition of time where it's like they couldn't do digital effects yet, and so they're still depending on practical effects, and it felt like they reached a peak. And then it's like we all turned to digital effects for such a long time, and now it's like we're getting back to practical effects a little bit, and so it's like they're kind of relearning the craft. I mean, obviously, there's good people out there, guys like Greg Nicotero and Robert Kurtzman,
Yeah.
guys have been around and done it practical effects forever. But yeah, I think it's almost like we went on a curve. Because in the early 2000s, it started with the digital effects, then it got way overblown with digital effects. And we're still living in a digital effects era, but I think practical effects are making a strong comeback with things like Terrifier 2 and movies like that where it's like all practical.
Yeah, for sure.
So now my best gore, and the one that really got me, man, the one that definitely got me in terms of like just the blood, it was so hard. It was actually kind of hard to watch because I don't know, for some reason I could just feel it. Was when Addison goes into the room and she sees the antidote. She sticks her hands into the glass case to reach for the antidote and then tries to pull it back down. And the razor closings trap her arms in there. And she keeps kind of trying to jerk her arms out of there. And it just slices her up and there's blood just pouring down her arms. I don't know. Certainly, I've not been trapped in a contraption like that, so I don't really know what it feels like, but I could feel it. Like it was one of those visceral feelings where it's like I was talking about with like getting hit in the testicles. There's something about that feeling that you just feel it, and you're like, oh, that would just be so bad. That would just be so hard to watch. It was so hard to watch, and you know it doesn't feel good.
I'm feeling it right now in like my butt cheeks. Like it's getting me in a weird like it's super cringe inducing, like and in the best way possible, like the seeing those metal blades like dig into her arms as she's trying to pull herself out, and the blood is pooling in the glass box on top of her, so she's getting painted in this red light. Really crafty stuff, like a great crafty kill. That wasn't one of the most elaborate ones there. It was actually really simple. Like she just reaches up into a box to get the antidote, and then she gets stuck on those razor traps. Just simple and effective, and fucking gets right under your skin. Pun intended.
Real gruesome. Just again, you can feel
Yeah.
it. Also, what I appreciated about it is it wasn't like gruesome and like obviously with like the nail mask that like closes on him and you see the blood come spurting out, killed him, or even the head beginning blown off kills him. Like that doesn't kill her immediately. Like she's kind of stuck in this trap.
Yeah, it's
like,
suffering.
Trying to jerk out, and she's just like bleeding out.
Yeah, fucking, it's a really good one. It might be the best one. I'm not ranking them, but boy, it's up there because of just how visceral it is.
Yeah. Well, to that point, Patrick, what is the best game in Saw 2? Because there are a lot of games being played here. So what is your favorite game, the best game in Saw 2?
Lots of games being played, Damon, but truth be told, the one game that has stuck with me since the day I watched this movie in the
Stuck
theaters,
with you, literally. Stuck with you.
literally stuck with me, is the Pit of Needles. And it's a great sequence. It's such a great sequence because I believe it's Xavier's game,
It
but
is.
that's when we learn what Xavier is willing to do to win this to win in this situation. It's supposed to be his game where he's supposed to dive into a pit of needles to find the key to open the door. Well, he's like, fuck that. He grabs Amanda and tosses her in there and goes find the fucking key. And you're just like, oh my god, she's stuck in a pit with a bunch of hypodermic needles, and you just, oh man, it is nails on a chalkboard. It's fucking stepping on the nail in the on the staircase. Like it's just and she's in there, and at first she's kind of like frozen in place because she's getting stabbed by all these needles, and then she's like, ah, fuck it, she starts going crazy, like clawing around, like she's like, fuck it, I'm in here, and she goes for the key. She gets the key, he snatches it, and he's still too late, and the door locks forever. And I was like, fuck, that's fantastic, because they didn't even win the game. Like all that, they went through all that shit and still lost the game. I love it. And that pit of needles, man, I was like anticipating it the entire time I was watching. I was like, that moment's gonna happen. The pit of needles is gonna happen again. Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. And there it came, and it was just as effective as the first night I saw it.
Pit of Needles. I talked about the glass case of emotion with the razor closures, whatever you want to call them. That was pretty nasty. Nothing made me cringe harder than the Pit of Needles. Like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me be clear about this. I'm not scared of needles. You and I
Right,
both.
me neither.
Tattoos. We're not. I'm not scared of needles. Not scared of needles at all. But still, when you get pricked with a needle, it still doesn't feel good. It's like if you've ever sewed anything and you stick your finger with a sewing needle, it's just like that jolt. You know what I mean? Now
Yeah.
imagine just having like 30 of them stuck in you, and it's just like it hurts, but it doesn't kill. If that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it's a really unnerving pain. And then watching her fall into that pit of needles, and then she pulls up, and you see the needles all sticking out of her arms and her fucking body, and it's just so gross. And
Yeah.
everybody at some point in their life has been stuck with a hypodermic needle. Now, some people are truly terrified of hypodermic needles. I'm not. Like when we did the whole COVID vaccine, when I
Yeah.
first got that, I hadn't had a shot in a while. And they came over and they're like, "Are you scared of needles?" I was like, "Look at my arms. Do I look like I'm scared of needles?" And they just did it and didn't. I mean, just it's a little prick, didn't really hurt, and it was
Yeah.
over. You know what I mean? Like, didn't bother me at all. But that scene is a whole other level, man. When you get tossed into a pit of hypodermic needles, man, that is really hard to watch.
Yeah, and I'm not even like, I'm with you. I'm not even scared of needles. I have all the vaccines. I had to get a bunch. I just went to Africa this year, so I had to get a bunch more vaccines. And like, but there's something about a hypodermic needle. There's a dull pain, and there's a precision. Like you sit still while they give you a shot, because it's somewhere in the back of your mind, you're like, I don't want to jolt because I don't want the needle to like snap off in my body. And like, and this couldn't have been a worse situation. Like Amanda's just like slammed on top of a big pile of shitty, dirty needles. And I was like, oh God, what an awful, awful thing.
Yeah,
Whoever came up with that torture device is a real sicko.
yeah, I liked it though. It was great, and I'm with you. I knew it was coming. I'm like, oh, here it comes, and it's going to be bad. So, truth be told, much like best performance, this is really the one that got me, the Pit of Needles. But I'm cheating a little bit, and I'm going a different way for my favorite game. And when I started thinking about it, I was trying to think like, is it the safe? Is it the is it the revolver thing at the beginning? There's different games being played here. The furnace game with the total torch.
Yeah, furnace one's good.
But I was like, you know what? I didn't realize the best game of all, my favorite game, was the game being played with Detective Matthews with Lesser Wahlberg. As I said earlier, and I'm not going to reiterate everything again, Jigsaw told him when Lesser Wahlberg sat down, I just want you to sit here and have a conversation with me and talk to me. If you do that, Your son will be found safe. Your son will be safe and sound. Very literal use of the word safe because he was sitting 2 feet to the next to him in a safe. I was thinking about it today when I was thinking about my answers for tonight's podcast, and I was like, that really was the best game. The gameplay on Lesser Wahlberg. Because all he had to do was listen. He had to play Jigsaw's game, which was just talk to me. Listen to me and talk to me like a human being for 2 hours. You'll get your son back. Couldn't do it. And now he's dead.
Yeah.
I just thought, man, that is the ultimate torture. Because he'll never know. Like, he'll never know. He'll lay in that room and die, and he'll never know what happened. He'll never know his son is perfectly fine. He'll lay there for 8 days or however long it takes you to die of starvation and lack of water. He'll die never knowing that his son made it out alive. That is 8 shades of fucked up.
And that's like the real maniacal genius of Jigsaw. Like that, it's just like, oh yeah, his death will be slow and painful, and he will never know that his son is okay. Like it's fucking gut wrenching.
That when I started thinking about it, I was like, that's the game. Like, that's the one that really wins. Like, that's the one that is just the most messed up, but also like the ultimate, like, oh my God, just like so bad. And talk about a slow, painful death, man. That's just that sounds like the least amount of fun ever.
And by the way, there's like Carrie Elwes and Lee Winnell's rotting bodies in there with him, and he's in the dark.
Carrie Elwes made it out. It's his foot.
No, he made it. Yeah, his rotting foot and Lee Winnell's rotting body. And it's just like, and it reeks of old shit and everything. And you're just like, oh yeah, that's just going to be a terrible, slow, painful death.
Yeah, that's going to suck real bad. So to that point, talking about things that suck real bad, Patrick, in his ever twisted, messed up Jigsaw mind, came up with this next category. I'm going to allow you to introduce it, and then I'm going to allow you to go first with your answer for this next category, Patrick.
Damon, I'd like to play a game, if you will. And what I decided was you and I have to create the worst scenario for each other. So you are my Jigsaw, I am yours. And I have to determine the worst possible game for Damon Martin to play. Now, there's one stipulation I made to this rule. You cannot choose death. Because I know Damon. Damon sometimes be like, you know what? Just fucking kill me. All right? I don't give a shit. I'm not going to play this game. I'm done. Like, I know you, and I know that. So in the spirit of Saw, you must fight to live. You must absolutely fight to live. There's no option to get out. You must fight to live. If you fail, you fail. But you're trying to win. So, Damon, would you like to play a game?
Let's go.
Should I go first, or you want to go first?
No, you go first. Go ahead. I want to hear yours first.
All right, Damon. You're going to wake up in a room full of small children.
Oh, God.
All of these small children have diarrhea. You must safely get them out of this room, one by one, by carrying them. All the while, Halloween Ends plays on an endless loop, but not just the movie. Only Corey scenes. Corey scenes only. Damon, would you like to play this game?
Can I use one of the children to cover my head as I run?
No, you cannot. No. You must successfully remove the diarrhea-ridden children while watching only the Corey scenes of Halloween Ends.
It's really ironic that we know each other this well, because when you hear my next, you're going to laugh your ass off.
And by the way, folks, last night when I proposed this to Damon, he goes, as long as it doesn't have to do with Halloween Ends. I was like, well, you're in for a treat.
Oh my God.
Because I had already had it written when you said that.
That is the ultimate torture right there. I do not have children, do not want children, never want children. So children, diarrhea, and Halloween Ends is like my ultimate hellscape.
Not just Halloween Ends. Corey Ends. It's just Corey.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. So yeah, that's I don't know if I make it out. I might just go. I don't know if I die as much as I just go mad in that moment. You'd find me like babbling on the floor like, Corey.
Jigsaw goes, he just collapsed from an aneurysm, I guess. That took about 5 seconds.
Yeah. So I've actually written a script for yours, Patrick. So I'm going to turn.
I love it.
I'm going to turn into my best Jigsaw voice here. So let me get ready for this. Hello, Patrick. I want to play a game. You spent your life as a filmmaker, and yet you choose to critique films that you believe are inferior. If you look around, you'll find yourself in a familiar cabin. It's the same one from the movie 30 Miles from Nowhere. And you'll as soon as my voice stops, that film will soon be playing on a repetitive loop. In front of you is a laptop computer. You must produce a glowing 4-star review that receives at least 100 likes on Letterboxd, or you'll never leave this room alive. Live or die. It's your choice.
There aren't enough words to fucking dance around making 30 Miles from Nowhere a good movie. I can't believe you fucking pulled that out of the annals of history.
You don't have to make it. Hold on. You don't have to write it. It has to get 100 likes on Letterboxd. So you're not just done. You have to write it so well that enough people actually like it to let you out of here.
You know, I fancy myself a decent writer, but there's no amount of writing that's going to save that movie. There's just no. You know what's funny is the other night, my wife and I were sitting down to watch a horror movie, and I was like, on Damon's recommendation, I'm going to go to Peacock because they just stockpiled all the horror movies for Halloween season. And she goes, "Ooh, what's that? 30 Miles from Nowhere. What is I? No, we are not watching that. That might be the worst horror movie I've ever seen in my life."
So for maybe new listeners, because this is going back quite a ways. When we were very
this is way back.
This is like first 10 episodes of the podcast. This is going back quite a ways. Which all the podcasts are available. I always say at the end of the show, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But seriously, they are all out there. You can go all the way back to our first episode, which was The Shining in October of 2020?
20. Yeah, I think it's 2020.
So all the way, so almost exactly 3 years ago. Go all the way back, and I think like our 10th, 8th or 9th or 10th episode, we were trying to try and find movies, and I had found a movie on Shudder, I think at the time, but it's out there other places. You mentioned Peacock, called 30 Miles to Nowhere. And actually how I found it was I was trying to look for like movies that were like slasher, kind of like newer films that weren't just like iconic slasher films. And I saw this like neo slasher about this, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it sounds intriguing. Now the premise sounded intriguing. So I was like, let's just take a shot on it. Boy, did I miss on that one. That was off target by a lot. But I've never heard in all the 150 plus episodes of this podcast, I've never heard Patrick get angrier and more upset at a movie than 30 Miles. So I know I'm going deep cuts. When you say Halloween Ends, it makes sense to everybody because I at least stick in one, like, I hate Halloween Ends, at least once an episode. People who have not been here all this time may not remember 30 Miles from Nowhere, but go back and listen to that episode. It's a very early episode. I'm not going to say it's our best because audio, things like that have gotten better over time, but just take some time and listen to the disdain in Patrick's voice reviewing that movie because it is absolutely hilarious. Now, I didn't like it either, to be fair. I certainly didn't like it either, but that is my Halloween Ends is your 30 Miles from Nowhere. So I went a little deep cuts on my Saw torture, but that's what I did with yours. So.
Oh God, that's gonna suck. It's just that's a shitty game. That's that devious maniacal mind of Jigsaw getting right to the core of me, isn't it? Because God damn, do I hate that movie.
I thought waking up in the cabin where they filmed it was a good touch.
Oh God, yeah, it's a shitty cabin too. Yeah, no, I do encourage people to go. I mean, yes, it's not our most polished stuff. It kind of audio is not as good as it is these days, but I think it's still one of the most entertaining episodes I think we've ever put out there.
Yeah, so it is a deep cut. I did go deep cuts on this one, but maybe I'm also doing a little advertising for an early episode. So go back and listen to our 30 Miles from Nowhere episode. It is rather hilarious. And that to me is stuck in my head as like the movie that like tortures Patrick. So yes, that is why you would get tortured by 30 Miles from Nowhere.
Damn right. Yeah, I'm not surviving that either.
I do like though that the way we torture each other is with movies that both of us hate, which speaks to us as like film lovers. That like the way I torture you is with a bad movie, the way you torture me is with a bad movie.
Yeah, without planning that at all. That's how it came out.
Yeah, and also, yeah, to be clear, we had no idea until right now. We had no idea what these plans were. So that's why when you said Halloween Ends, it wasn't because of that. I was like, it was funny because we both picked films to torture each other. I was like on a repetitive loop, and it's the same.
Oh god, Corey cutscenes. Oh,
Oh man, I watch. You know what we should do at some point? I feel like we need to revisit that movie, just like to like a quick 10-minute episode of like rewatching it and just like seeing if it's still just as bad now as it was back then. Like I think it'd be hilarious to revisit.
that's a good idea. We should do in the near future. We should find some time to revisit Halloween Ends.
No. I was talking about 30 Miles from Nowhere. No, we don't.
Oh no! I don't want to do 30 Miles from Nowhere. Let's do Halloween Ends.
Halloween Ends was like a year ago. I don't need to go back there yet. I'm not ready for that. 30 Miles from Nowhere is 3 years ago. We got plenty of time to go into that one.
Damon, there is not a worse horror movie that I've seen than 30 Miles. There's no way I need to go back and see how that holds up.
And you didn't like Halloween Ends either. You like torturing me is what it is. So that's
well, we knew the way to each other's heart, didn't we?
Yes, we did. So there you go. How do you torture one of your closest friends and podcast co-hosts with movies they hate? All right, Patrick, let's talk about, we're going to be obviously reviewing Saw 2 right now, which is a prequel, and in a couple weeks, or in a couple of days, I guess at this point, we're going to be reviewing Saw X, which comes out at the end of September. We will drop our episode a few days after it comes out, of course, like we always do. We know the premise of the movie. It's been in the trailers. I'm not spoiling anything because I haven't seen it. I couldn't spoil it if I wanted to. We know this film takes place between Saw 1 and Saw 2. And basically, John Kramer's Jigsaw gets duped into a cure for his cancer. He finds out it's all a sham. And the people who tricked him are who he's going after. So this is much like Saw 1, a more personal Saw movie. We know that Jigsaw is back. John Kramer, Tobin Bell. We also know that Amanda, Shawnee Smith, is coming back as well. So I guess the category here, Patrick, is what do we want out of this Saw X movie? Because this is technically a new film. Obviously it is. But it's also a film that's sandwiched in between two films that you and I both like quite a bit. We like Saw 2. We loved Saw, the original Saw. So what do we want out of this film? What are we looking for in Saw X?
I think what I'm looking for in Saw X more than anything is Tobin Bell in action. Because, as we said, he's laying on the floor face down in Saw 1. He's basically sitting at a desk in Saw 2. So we have this gap in between, which, by the way, I would love it if this movie basically opens on him shutting the door, like a la the end of Saw. Like, it'd be cool if that's kind of the beginning of this movie. But I want to see him make his way. Like, I want to see him do the job, because he's so good at it. I mean, obviously, careful what you wish for. Maybe that the magic of these two movies is that you don't see how he does the job.
Yeah.
But this is the opportunity for once to see it in action. And as we said, as we talked about Saw 2 tonight, being able to sit across the table from him, you got a taste of his maniacal mind. Well, now I want to see the maniacal mind in action. And I hope that's what we get here. And by the way, I hope we get tons of Shawnee Smith. Like, it's not just enough. It's not just a little bit like sprinklings. And like, I want to see her evolve into choosing to be his protege, choosing to be his acolyte. I want to see how that plays out. You got the two actors. You got the two parts of these movies that I truly love. So use them to their fullest potential.
So I agree with everything you just said. More Tobin Bell, which I think we're going to get. More Shawnee Smith, which I hope we will get. We know at this point, if you're going in to see Saw X, you already know in your head that Shawnee Smith, Amanda, is his acolyte. So I don't think they're going to try to pull any trickery with that, like, to expose that she was, another try to twist reveal. We know she's his apprentice, so I don't think they're going to try to pull any of that kind of stuff. My biggest hope is, I know this sounds like a weird one, but my biggest hope is that it just fits. It fits as like an actual, Saw 1.5. That's all I want. Because, like, if the traps get too elaborate, so we go from that to Saw 2, which is technically supposed to take place after Saw X, We get the needle pit. We get the gun and the revolver and the peephole. You know, they're all, you know, the furnace. They're all really cruel, but also practical inside the house tricks. Part of what I have heard from other people with with a lot of the Saw sequels is the traps got so elaborate they got ridiculous. Like they got way too overblown, and it's like, okay, this is stupid at this point. Kind of is like what I've heard. Don't do that. Like keep it simple, keep it to your core. Don't make it, because if you go too far, it's not gonna fit. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like he didn't graduate to making the most advanced traps ever in his basically his really this is his first one, because the first Saw is really a more of a cerebral like torture movie. It's not traps. Like the trap is, yes, they're trapped in the room and he left them with a hacksaw to cut off their own legs, but there's no like traps. Like there's no, even like the Amanda trap in the first one's the real trap, like where she's trapped in the bear mask.
There's the razor wire gauntlet too.
Oh yeah, that one too. Yeah. So I mean, but again, it's more of a, like the main plot of the movie is more of a cerebral, like messing with you kind of thing until the dude literally hacks off his own leg. What I don't want in this one is somehow there's just this really elaborate, this really elaborate labyrinth of a puzzle they have to solve, because it feels unnatural to where this film takes place in the film universe. And then all I really want out of that is that, because I already know the plot, the general plot, and I'm okay with that. I don't need I don't need some big mystery at the core of this film or anything, because again, this is fitting between Saw 1 and Saw 2. By Saw 2, when we meet Jigsaw and when he's interacting with Lesser Wahlberg, he's already dying. So where else are we going to go? Like, we need to get to Saw 2. So just get us there. Make it fit. That's my only request. Yeah. Don't go outside yourself. Don't make it so crazy that it doesn't feel genuine. I want it to feel like I watched Saw, and then I watched Saw X, and then I watched Saw 2, and it all fits as one perfect puzzle, if that makes sense. Now, I know that's a lofty expectation because Saw was really, really good, and that was in 2004, I believe. Saw 2 was really, really solid, and that was 2005. We're 18 years past that, Patrick. It's never going to be perfect. So I don't need to be perfect, but just fit in the universe. Don't go outside yourselves. Don't make the trap so elaborate that it doesn't make sense. Make Jigsaw and make Amanda fit well together and make it a puzzle piece that actually works in the larger universe. That's my only real request.
Yeah, I think it's an easy request because, I mean, when you start a screenplay, you need a beginning and an end first, really, even before your middle. Your middle helps you get to the end. But if you know your beginning and you know your end, which, by the way, we know, the beginning of Saw X is the end of the original Saw. The end of Saw X is the beginning of Saw 2. You have your beginning and you have your end. So get us through the middle. That's an easy ask. And I believe Josh Stolberg's the writer on this new one, if I'm not mistaken. Shout outs to Josh Stolberg. He's actually, what's that?
I said I believe so, and I think, isn't it Darren Lynn Bousman's back to direct? Right?
And Darren Lynn Bousman's directing, yeah. So, these are veterans of the Saw franchise. I'm Twitter buddies with Josh Stolberg. I'll drop that name here. WGA Strong. No, I know he's not necessarily promoting it right now, but either way, I think your request should be met pretty easily. I'm hoping. We're gonna find out. We'll find out in very short order.
It's always a risk to go back to the well when you've got a really good franchise that has a solid start. Now, again, I know the finish of Jigsaw, or of Saw, I should say, didn't go as strong because I really haven't had a lot of interest in watching, and I've not heard a lot of great things about some of the sequels. But I really liked Saw 1. I really liked Saw 2. So if they're trying to make this one fit as a middle movie to that, just make it fit. That's my only request. It's like, this isn't a prequel, this is a sequel. But speaking of David Gordon Green with Halloween Ends, when the original Halloween came out in 2018, I was excited, but I was also a little scared because I'm like, oh man, you're literally trying to retcon everything that happened after the original 1978 Halloween, which I'll be honest, I didn't totally agree with at the time. I didn't really like that. I'm like, just don't erase history, but make what you can out of it. Then when I saw it, and you and I have talked about this on air and off air, like we both really liked the 2018 Halloween. There's only one thing I bump up against that movie. It's not like a major thing, but otherwise, that's a really good film. Like it's a really,
Yeah.
really well done sequel. I still personally love Halloween H2O. I know that's a more divisive film among Halloween fans, but that's another one that kind of did that as well. Although that happened out, like they did Halloween 1, Halloween 2, and then Halloween H2O. It's kind of like the sequence of that film. I really like that one as well. So it can be done. You can go back into a universe years later and make a quality film. You know what I mean? Like you can. I know those weren't prequels; those were sequels, but it can be done. I guess is what I'm getting at. You can revisit it years after the fact, and it can be a good, solid film. That's my hope for this one. This one's a little trickier because they're fitting it into a middle of two other films, but they're bringing back what we loved about Saw. They're bringing back Tobin Bell. They're bringing back Shawnee Smith, and it seems like they're sticking to the core principle of what Saw is. And as you said, Darren Lynn Bousman's back. He's directed a bunch of these films. He seems to understand the universe. Tobin Bell is back. Shawnee Smith is back. I feel like we're going to be at least pleasantly surprised, or at least like happy. I guess that's my biggest goal. I want to leave this film and be like, yeah, that was a good puzzle piece to fit in there. And I love your idea of the opening being him closing the door on Lee Wanell's character after Carrie Elway's escapes. And I would love for the end of Saw X to be Amanda going into the house, like walking into the house, and and everyone's gonna be knocked out. Maybe even Lesser Wahlberg makes an appearance because what the fuck else is he doing these days? Something like that. That would be a cool way to end it, right? Like you lead into Saw 2. I think that'd be a cool, like you bookend it. The opening is Saw 1, him closing the door. Saw 2 is her opening the door to go into the house. I think that'd be kind of like a cool transition.
I think it'd be great. We'll see. We're very close to finding out.
Yeah. All right, Patrick, let's talk about Can We Survive This Horror Film? It's one of my favorite categories where you and I, unlike our premises where we truly tortured each other, if we drop ourselves into Saw 2, so we're in the house with Xavier and Danny and Amanda and the useless girl and all the other people in there, could we survive this movie? So, Patrick, could you survive Saw 2?
Considering that I would not be Lester Wahlberg's son, that I'd have to be someone else in that house, there is actually no chance I can survive. It was all designed for me to die. That was always the plan. So there was no way out. There's actually no end to the maze. There's no thing. I might have survived longer than, like, the minute I saw Xavier start sacrificing other people for his gain, I'd be like, oh, cool. I will get the jump on him, kill him, and then at least take him out. Like I'd probably survive Xavier, but I can't survive the house because it was never intended for me to get out of there. There was no exit plan for me. There was no game that got me out of the house. I can't survive.
Yeah, so I'm not surviving either for that exact reason. Like they didn't the house was set up for everyone to die minus Amanda and Danny. So I'm not making out there. But the one thing I will tell you, and I'm not sitting here telling you I'm an ultimate badass by any stretch of the imagination, but Jonas, played by Glenn Plummer, who I like Glenn Plummer. He's a good actor. He's another one, like, I could have easily slipped into like a best performance. I really liked him. He's an underrated actor. He's been in a lot of things, and he's kind of like that. Oh, that guy. I know who he is. He played Jonas. Jonas was kicking Xavier's ass. And then he got sick from the gas, and that's when he got the baseball bat with the nails in the back of the head, because he was kicking his ass. Listen, I'm not sitting there saying I'm the ultimate badass, but I'm 6'3". I would take Xavier out. Xavier ain't kicking shit. I will kick his ass quickly. So I'll survive that dude at the very least. I'll throw him into the pit of needles. But I ain't making it out because there ain't no one going to make it out. Like, it ain't going to happen. So, yeah, I'm like, knowing my luck, I'd be the guy to his head blown off by the revolver at the start. Like, don't do that. I'm like, what? Hypothetically, if I make it past that, I would stop Xavier. But at some point, they're definitely going to get me, whatever it is. Although I do give credit, it was a cool ending with Danny killing Xavier with the hacksaw from Saw 1. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it was cool. It was a cool little ending to it. But yeah, there's no way out.
Yeah, we're dead. They ain't gonna make it out. But Xavier, you're fucked is all I'm saying, buddy.
Oh yeah, Xavier's fucked for sure. for sure.
He ain't getting the hacksaw because we're getting to him first. Last category is always Patrick. We always talk about this is a horror movie podcast after all. Is it scary? So Patrick, at the end of the day, Saw 2, is it scary?
It's scary in the Saw way. Like Saw is different. Saw's from this early 2000s vibe where it's very like music video-y, highly stylized. Like it's become weirdly a time capsule because it's almost 20 years old at this point. I hate even thinking about that, but truth be told, it's a hell of a long time ago that these movies came out. So you sort of see them in this sphere that's not as scary. However, what's important to Saw movies is great games, great traps, great torture devices. You get that in Saw 2 in a great way. You get the big grand game is intriguing and has fantastic twists. This is what you look for in Saw movies, so it's all there. So in that respect, this movie is Saw scary.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is Saw scary. And again, Saw is a different kind of horror movie. It's not trying to get you with jump scares. It's not trying to get you with like those kind of, just the moments where you're truly terrified in a dark room or whatever the case may be. They're not trying to get you like the Conjuring universe tries to get you. They're not even trying to get you like the way that a lot of slasher movies try to get you with jump scares and things like that. And other movies that have truly terrified me. Like I think, movies like Session 9, which is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Like that's a really terrifying film in my mind, but totally nothing like Saw. What Saw does is it kind of slips a little bit into the torture porn, like it's a lot of the blood and the traps and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit of that, which I don't mind that. Obviously, like Hostel is not for everybody. Martyrs, which we reviewed, is not for everybody. I get that. Saw kind of slips into that universe a little bit, right? Like it's not that kind of scary. It's more of like
it's like gateway body horror.
It's the nails getting pulled off kind of horror. Like, can you stand a nail? Can you see like a torture scene of someone getting their fingernail pulled off and not like want to clench your fists and cry? That's where Saw fits in. And I'd say by that regard it is because there's at least a couple of moments in this movie where I cringe. And of course the pit trap with the syringes is at the top of that list. And then the razor box.
Yeah.
Call it. Both of those had me kind of cringing in that moment, particularly the syringes. That's scary to me. You know what I mean? Like not in like I was, scared to turn on the lights and I was trembling in my seat or anything, but like for Saw, which is what Saw is, yes, it's scary by that measure because that's what they're going for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're dealing with Saw scary here, and I know there's way bigger Saw fans out there than us that have seen all the movies. If you've seen any of them and they're good, go ahead and drop us an email and let us know because I'd like to know which ones to see and which ones to omit because I only got so much time in the day to watch horror movies. I don't need to watch the dumb ones.
We are eventually going to do the entire Saw franchise, and here's the scary part about that, Patrick. We've already done a lot of the good ones. We did Saw 1 and Saw 2. We did Spiral, and we're going to do Saw X. That means we got all the other ones stuck in the middle there that we're eventually going to have to get to.
Yeah, that sounds like another 5 or 6 left.
Yeah, there's 10. We've done 4, so 6 more left. Yes.
Oh, okay. Rough.
One of them was 3D also, just to let you know on that one. One of them was 3D.
Always good when a horror adds 3D.
Yeah. As long as it turns into Friday the 13th 3D, where it's literally they're just punching you in the face with things to make it come at the screen, which is still hilarious.
Oh my god! Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that.
One day, not right now, but we will get to
not
Saw
today.
X very soon. Yeah, not today. So we will get to Saw X very soon. So stay tuned for that, of course. That'll be coming up very soon. We'll get to Saw X, and for now, enjoy our Saw 2 review. Want to say a big thank you, as always, to everyone that tunes into the show. We always appreciate that. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up anytime on email. That is rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or hit us up on any of our social media channels. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram. We're all over the place on those. And then you can also find the podcast on all of your favorite podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and of course our YouTube channel, which you can search and find under Rewind of the Living Dead. I sense a theme here with Rewind of the Living Dead, Patrick. Find us there. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit us up anytime. And you can also hit us up on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And we appreciate everyone that tunes in each and every week to the show. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.